It was the weapon that thundered across the frozen battlefields of the Eastern Front. Light, viciously fast, and impossible to ignore, the PPSh-41 was far more than just a submachine gun. It was Stalin's answer to German firepower, a weapon designed not only to fight, but to overwhelm. Armed with a 71-round drum magazine and a rate of fire so fast it sounded like cloth tearing in the wind, the PPSh-41 transformed entire battles. Soviet soldiers didn't simply carry it, they swarmed with it, drowning enemy positions in storms of lead. Beneath its simple, rugged shell was a design of brutal brilliance, forged for one purpose: survival. But how did this crude weapon of stamped steel become the backbone of the Red Army in World War II? And why did it continue to surface in wars across Korea, Vietnam, and countless modern conflicts decades later? This is the untold story of the PPSh-41, a weapon born of desperation, built in haste, and remembered as one of the most iconic firearms in history. The crisis of 1941, the story begins, not with triumph, but with disaster. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, unleashing millions of German troops into Soviet territory. The Red Army was caught off guard, outgunned, and overwhelmed. German forces marched with cutting-edge weapons: the MG-34 machine gun, the MP-40 submachine gun, symbols of a modern mobile army. Soviet troops, in contrast, were still armed with aging Mosin-Nagant rifles and the unreliable PPD-40. The PPD was expensive, fragile, and slow to produce. It simply couldn't keep up with the demands of industrial war. Stalin's generals knew the Soviet Union needed a miracle, and fast. The birth of the PPSh, that miracle, came from an unheralded designer, Georgy Sh. His idea was deceptively simple: build a weapon that was cheap, rugged, and easy to mass-produce, instead of precision machining. His design used stamped steel parts, hammered into shape by unskilled labor. Even the wooden stock could be roughly carved. This meant the gun could be produced not by master craftsmen, but by factory workers evacuated east of the Urals. Far from advancing German forces, Spajan's prototype was rushed through approval and greenlit by Stalin himself. Production began almost immediately, even before the blueprints were finalized. By late 1941, the weapon entered service as the PPSh-41, a submachine gun built not for elegance, but for survival. A weapon of fire and fear, chambered for the 7.62 x 25 Tokarev cartridge. The PPSh-41 packed remarkable velocity and penetration for a submachine gun. Its open bolt, blowback action allowed for astonishing speed, 900 to 1,000 rounds per minute. That deafening rate of fire gave it its nickname, the burp gun. Two German soldiers. Its staccato roar meant one thing: death was coming. But it wasn't just speed. Thanks to the Tokarev round, the PPSh could hit targets at ranges up to 150 meters, far more than most submachine guns of its time. It worked in mud, in snow, in the frozen hell of the Eastern Front where other weapons froze. Solid. German troops often abandoned their MP-40s in favor of captured PPSh-41s. That respect spoke louder than any propaganda. The drum of doom. The gun's most iconic feature was its 71-round drum magazine, more than double the capacity of the MP-40. In close combat, one man with a PPSh could pin down an entire squad, though later stick magazines of 35 rounds were introduced for reliability and faster reloading. Nothing matched the psychological terror of the drum-fed storm of bullets. Soviet commanders quickly adapted their tactics, forming entire units around the PPSh. By 1943, some battalions carried nothing else. The Red Army turned the gun into more than a weapon. It became a doctrine. Urban assaults, trench raids, and night attacks were built on the PPSh's brutal efficiency. Soviet shock troops would charge at dawn with grenades and bayonets, PPSh-41s blazing in unison. breaking enemy defenses in minutes. The sound of war, the PPSh-41, wasn't only effective, it was terrifying. Its ripping, metallic scream echoed through forests, ruins, and city streets. German diaries describe troops freezing at the sound, their courage breaking before a single Soviet appeared. In Stalingrad and Leningrad, the weapon defined urban warfare. Soviet fighters ambushed Germans from sewers, basements, and rubbled piles. The gun tore through squads in seconds, and its drum-fed bursts gave a lone defender the power to hold an entire street. Germans nicknamed it the sewing machine. But unlike a sewing machine, it stitched death. A gun even the enemy loved ironically. The PPSh-41 became one of the most widely used German weapons of the war. So many were captured that the Wehrmacht officially reissued them as the MP717R, sometimes fitted with conversion kits for 9mm ammo. Think about that. A Soviet gun, so effective. The Nazis armed themselves with it rather than their own designs. Few weapons in history can claim that kind of respect. Adaptation and longevity. The PPSh was endlessly adaptable. Soviet factories modified it for winter use, painting them white for camouflage or insulating trigger groups for gloved hands. Soldiers customized their magazines, swapping drums for sticks when speed and reliability mattered most. This adaptability is what kept the gun alive for decades. Trusted, durable, and feared. It remained on the front lines long after the war had ended. A weapon of revolutions after 1945, millions of surplus PPSh-41s flowed across the world. It armed Soviet allies, communist revolutions, and guerrilla movements alike. In Korea, it shocked American troops who suddenly found themselves outgunned at close range. In Vietnam, Viet Cong fighters used it to devastating effect in jungle ambushes. Across Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, it became the weapon of resistance movements and insurgencies. For rebels and underdogs, it wasn't just a gun, it was a symbol of defiance. Legacy of steel. So, what makes the PPSh-41 legendary, even 80 years later? It wasn't pretty. It wasn't advanced. But it was practical, a weapon that could be built in hours, fired in mud or snow, and trusted to work every time the trigger was pulled. It symbolized the Soviet Union's resilience during its darkest hour, proving that sometimes simplicity wins wars. Entire tactics, doctrines, and even modern designs trace their roots back to what Spagin created in 1941. Today, the PPSh-41 survives as a museum relic, a collector's prize, and a symbol of gritty industrial warfare. Yet its DNA lives on in every capacity. Close quarters, weapon carried by soldiers today. It wasn't just a submachine gun. It was a turning point. It was a legacy, one forged in desperation, tempered by war, and remembered in the echoes of history. The story of the PPSh-41 is the story of how steel, fire, and human resolve can shape the outcome of a world war.